panel we have today is supposed to, well, the brief that was given to us is really, really broad. It says that we have to focus on our assumptions and perspectives on understanding economic growth, trickle-down economics, sustainable development, and will also highlight the key challenges of equity, equality, and justice. That's a lot to finish in 45 minutes for three of us. But so we'll try and move this like really fast so we get more time for questions from the audience. Just to begin with, we are living in really, indeed, historic times. There's Ayodhya happening, which is national civilizational level. There is the local level Pune Policy Festival that just sold out before anybody could even say snap. And for the economy, we're living in historic times because it's a global slowdown, and India is emerging as one of the fastest growing major economies, which is, I think, very historic. So we'll ask Rahul whether this is India's breakout moment.
Thanks, Sumita, and lovely to be back in Pune. So I would say it is, right? I mean, to a large extent, and a lot of this has been covered in some of the conversations we have heard so far today. Uh, I think we need to understand why there is so much emphasis on India right now. It's not just because China is slowing down, right? I mean, China slowed down. I mean, I guess the manner in which it has happened was perhaps not expected, but the fact that any country does hit certain roadblocks or does hit certain speed bumps beyond a certain point, it was not itself a surprise. But India, I think at this particular point we find ourselves at a confluence of several issues in which India does have seem to have a lot of advantages, right? And obviously the first one, and this issue globally does not get spoken about that much, but the biggest advantage, and this is not particularly a deep insight, that our demographic advantage is huge in a world. And like if you look at the numbers, right? So our services exports, which kind of have been growing for the last 25 years, but they have effectively doubled in the last 4 years. Why is that? It's because suddenly the world experienced the need for a lot of tech support. There was a lot of desire for outsourcing, which was not necessarily driven by just the fact that you have you need to cut costs. I mean, inflation did play a role in it, but it was also about the availability of the talent pool, right? I mean, nowhere in the world do we have the kind of scale of technical graduates, engineering graduates, people who are basically studying STEM in such large numbers, speaking English at a reasonably proficient level, right? At the same time, what has happened in China has led to this entire refocusing on supply chains. Now, I always say that, in 2018, and I think we have spoken about this in the past, that, India lucked into industrial policy, not because of we were thinking, in advance that pandemic will come and, it will lead to supply chain problems. It was because of our own weaknesses. But this has become a global issue in which, for whatever reason, we have a slight head start, right? And since we have a lot of demand, which is in principle expected to be generated over the next couple of decades, there is incentive for a lot of foreign companies to look at India from a different perspective, right? So it becomes a breakout moment for India in that context. Then you have the whole, digital public infrastructure, the whole productivity spree. We have gotten better at building infrastructure. Like if you look at the number of airports. I mean, sorry, this is not a pot shot at Amit, uh, but no. But we are building infrastructure in a very stunning way. Like one of my favorite statistics, till recently, before this, the Mumbai Nagpur expressway got opened, Pakistan, which is a country about say one fourth the size of India, had more expressways in absolute kilometers than India did. And we have obviously crossed that threshold, but we have about 5,000 kilometers of expressways right now. It will go to 15,000, right? And the productivity boost that comes from it will be significant. The financialization has been very, very strong. The key challenge, though, I would say there are two key problems with this entire thing. One is that as a country, and I think to Vijay Gokhale's point earlier, that we tend to be very insular. The risk is that we end up buying our own BS, right? And we stop doing things that are really required to get growth going over a long period of time. It's about that compounding narrative. The second key challenge is that we are still in a very, very turbulent world, which will mean that there is going to be conflict, there is going to be a lot of curveballs that will come around. How do we deal that would basically depend on our own internal capacity, both from a physical perspective, from a military perspective, from an intellectual perspective, from our the agility that is required in policy making is going to be significant, right? And that is something that does require the engagement of not just the government, but of civil society, of think tanks, of businesses, of colleges, right? I mean, to kind of inculcate that thought process and that counter side of being able to think in those terms. So, but I think the core opportunity here is that India is likely to grow very comfortably at 6.5%. The real challenge is how do we grow at about 7.5-8% by ourselves without really relying a lot on the world. We will do more of that, but the thing is we need to do our get our own stuff in order, right? I mean, I'm not going to use a cuss word here, but but effectively it's about doing our own basic stuff right. Get more women into the labor market, do more savings, and that will basically set us up to become the most important economy from a growth perspective in 5 to 7 years time. And I don't think this is necessarily a very, very outlandish idea. It is actually quite doable in the current context.
So we're looking at like 7.5 to 8% consistently compounded over the next few years should be able to.
I would say we are
It's a
not
doable.
looking at it now,
No, it's a
but
doable.
it's an opportunity that
Okay.
can be
It's a
that we
doable
can get
target.
there. It should be our target,
Okay.
right? That should be our target.
Our target.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the point about equity and whether this growth is actually expanding opportunities as well as incomes for more people than ever before, because that brings us to the equity part of it. So he spoke about financialization. So financialization, digitization. How is that? Like, is that decreasing inequalities, increasing opportunities?
No question. I would say, so if you look at it, three buckets: digital payments, digitally driven investments, and business creation or startup formation. Because all those three are being tracked in some of the economic surveys and other data that's being put out by the government. So if you look at digital payments, obviously we all have experienced it across the country, the length and breadth, even into the hinterland. Uh, Whether it's a 10 rupee payment or if it's some remote part of Himachal Pradesh or Tamil Nadu or wherever, uh, that mode has really penetrated into the heartland of India. And that was simply not happening earlier. I think for many decades now, governments have been trying to address this issue, that how should we get businesses to use less cash, for consumers to use less cash, but no one was really succeeding at it. Not for want of trying, but essentially nothing would work or nothing would scale up. So the digital payments piece obviously I think has truly democratized that bit of access and connecting sort of the masses to the financial mainstream. Because what happens when a small business starts accepting digital payments is they create a trail of records about what they are selling, what their transactions are, and so on. And then that can then be used by them to access credit. Whereas if a firm stays completely in the informal economy, you cannot really access formal credit then, obviously. So I think digital payments, the second order effect of that will be immensely powerful, and we will see that being unlocked probably in the coming years. We haven't really seen the power of that getting unleashed yet.
Unleashed yet. Yeah.
And the second piece, so digitally driven investments. So the ease with which now people in India can subscribe to IPOs, buy index funds, buy mutual funds, it's possible to set up like 1,000 rupee or a 500 rupee systematic investment plan, which is going into equity markets. So what is happening with digitally driven payments is people are keeping money in bank accounts, then they are taking that, putting it back into equity markets. Because when you have savings, where do you park it? So people are naturally turning to equity markets now. I think the number is something on the order of 2 trillion rupees or 2 lakh crores, probably close to 17,000 crores a month. That much capital is going consistently into different indices, market indices, as investment. So that's an enormous number, and it's quadrupled in the last 6 years. So, and it's only growing higher. By some estimates, this number should hit probably 3 trillion plus. So we are looking at north of 25,000 crores a month. And that is an enormous sort of ballast for Indian firms who are listed in the equity markets. And when a firm has an equity shareholder base of that type, a stable equity shareholder base, which is domestically oriented, that creates many other kind of possibilities for a listed entity. And the third piece is startup formation or business creation. So there too, I think the economic survey in 2021-22 had actually mapped out all the registered startups in India. They are there from pretty much across the country again. So from northeast to the southern states to Gujarat and Rajasthan and even Himachal Pradesh and so on. And the depth of this phenomenon, I think, has surprised everybody. Because I think if you told somebody 6-7 years back that you would see emergence of registered startups and even in some cases venture funded and angel funded startups coming up from Rajkot and Guwahati and Kochi and Mysuru, people would say it's unlikely, that no one would believe in that actually, because it was always seen as a metro phenomenon, as something which happens in Bangalore or Mumbai or Gurgaon and so on. But that penetration which has now gone across the country and the democratization where almost every city at this point has some kind of angel group, has some kind of seed investment sort of platform going on. People are getting together, putting in 1 to 2 crore investments from their savings. They're not just looking at SIPs, but those who have higher savings are even looking at startups very seriously. So I've been in that sector now for the last decade plus in India, and I can tell you, it is a complete sea change. There was a time in the 2010s, like 2011, 12, 13 or so, when even raising 5 crore rupees was a very big challenge for an Indian company. The number of people who could write a 5 crore check, you could probably count them on two hands. And from there, we are at a place where angel networks are putting in 5 crore rupees in cities like Chennai, in places like even Pune over here, very vibrant community of startups here. So I think that spread of business formation, of new ventures and so on, obviously these are the companies which create the jobs.
Yeah.
They are the ones who are when someone starts a business, they would probably employ initially a few people, and if they keep scaling up, they would employ dozens of people. So we should not underestimate how far this phenomenon has already gone, and for sure it is not slowing down right now. It is on a trajectory which is probably going to I would if I had to put a number on it, I would guess it'll go another 10x from here.
Yeah.
So I feel that this debate on growth and inequality, we should actually, somebody mentioned on the panel yesterday that for the time being we should prioritize growth. And all these channels, whether it's digital payments, digitally driven investment, business creation, all of them are essentially enable the growth of formal business in India.
Right.
And if we emphasize that, I think we'll hit the goal that Rahul was mentioning of consistently having 7.5 to 8% growth.
Yeah. So it is the democratization that where actually the growth that we are seeing is moving across into smaller town cities and the rural areas, as well as you're getting savings from there, as well as you're getting investment opportunities which are spreading around. So that's
Absolutely.
great. If talking about inequality, I don't know how many of you have read the Chief Economic Advisor's essays recently. Somebody hasn't on this panel, I know, but anyway. the first chapter was about credit rating. He actually gave a very good analysis of how the credit rating models are not been working properly. So please read that. But the second chapter is also extremely interesting. It's about inequality, and he goes into depth about the entire, the trajectory that India's had over all the decades. But the last where he actually concludes is actually very interesting for us, most pertinent for us, because he says that inequality is a relative and a very vexing issue, but absolute poverty reduction is what we really have to be working at, because, and he says that it's for the average aspirational Indian, progress at the grassroots, where he says 13.5 crore people moving out of multidimensional poverty between 2015-16 and 2019-21 matters much more than the number of billionaires in the country. Incidentally, the Niti Aayog has also put out new numbers recently. The different years, so different numbers, but the broad trend is definitely there that the poverty rate has been going down over the last decade. For those of you who are students, please go into the estimation methodology and so on. I'm not going to dwell into that here. So what Dr. Nageshwaran actually says at the end, he says that having said that about poverty reduction and about income inequalities, he says there are worse inequalities, which is unequal access to health and education.
Yes.
I would add the qualifier quality health and quality education, because I think those are also what are going to be affecting the growth potential of the country. We've all seen 12th fail very recently. All of us in this room know what privilege is. Speaking English very coherently gets you across much faster. There are barriers of access to education and health for language, caste, gender, at every various levels. The recent I think just 2 days ago, ASER results, ASER actually, annual status of education report, which is done by Pratham. It's been an annual survey done in India since 2005, and they looked at the age group 14 to 18 very across India. That is the one that we're talking about when we're talking about the demographic dividend, right? And here it's, when you see those numbers, you realize that the inequality is extremely stark. It's even geographic. Like you find during COVID, you find during the in the Northeast, you have out of school enrollment. The enrollment in school actually dropped during COVID, which didn't happen in other parts. You find other parts of India, it's very location specific, for instance. And then when you're talking about engineering, the results actually show that in the 11th and 12th, most of the kids are in arts and humanities. Having done a BA, I have to say I know what arts and humanities are, and therefore I learned more in the first year of Gokhale Institute's MA out here than I did in 3 years in my BA, but never mind that. But we know what that background actually is, and only 5% are in vocational, right? And if you're talking about the the digitization, even here you have an inequality that in that age group of 14 to 18, 90% or around 90% of these young people had access to a phone in their household, a smartphone in their household. But out of that, boys owned their own phone. Something like 43% of those boys owned the phone. Girls are 19%. Okay, so you see these inequalities which are going to impact whatever Rahul's talking about growth, sustained growth, and so on. So how do we actually fix this more aggressively? Because this is like the crux of high productivity, unemployment, everything. How do we fix this?
No, I mean it's not something that gets fixed very quickly, right? Because a lot of it is about the societal attitudes, and it also comes down to both health and education fundamentally being state subjects, right? So I mean the issue wouldn't really be about. I mean we have, if you take say the IITs and the IIMs, right? I mean okay, over the years we have created a lot more of them. There's a lot more proliferation of the knowledge, but the kid has to be good enough to get to that stage, right? And so some of this stuff has to be kind of talked about, and this is where the role of public policy becomes so critical, because most of the public policy, it's about the public, right? And if the public is not necessarily revolting against the lack of quality, or the lack of opportunity set that comes in, then you really cannot fix it completely. Now I'm not saying this sounds like a very nihilistic argument, but to a certain extent, a lot of the grassroots movement in this area, I mean a lot of work is being done, and we are seeing the mobilization of talent. So like I'll give you an example. I was in Chennai about a year and a half back, visiting some of the new facilities around manufacturing that are coming up in the area. So the entire Apple ecosystem, it is still very nascent, but it is growing very rapidly. And I was sitting with one of the CEOs of one of the supplier companies, which makes those switches, the bricks, which are used for the phones. And he was saying that they employ a lot of women, like almost over 80% of the labor force was women, young women, in the age bracket of 20 to 30, mostly unmarried, mostly coming in from the hinterland of Tamil Nadu. And then they had a tie up with a lot of the technical institutes to do the vocational training. Now this is just one example of it. I know in Pune MCCIA does a lot of this kind of work, but you need to get. Tata Motors has that as well. But these are small islands of excellence that we are building. It is not being done at a very significantly top down way, or so from that perspective, you kind of think about the experience of the skills development ministry. You don't need a graduate. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this in sitting in a public policy institute, but you don't need a graduate degree to know how to put together or shoulder something, right? I mean, you need to have the technical skills. I mean, I was talking to one of the largest construction companies in India, and they were saying that they struggle to find people who can like literally draw straight lines in construction.
Yeah.
From
Yeah,
that
yeah.
perspective,
That's
right?
there in the report as well.
And this is something that you cannot fix by, just talking about, like, this cannot be fixed by the government. This is something that fundamentally has to be fixed by the business and has to be fixed by, communities which are saying employ our kids better, right? And here I think we are moving in the right direction. It's just that there's a serious data issue, right? Till date, we don't have a regular survey. I mean, we are starting to do the PLFS, but it is riddled with a lot of issues. But still, it's better than where we were, where we don't have unemployment data. We don't know how many people are looking for jobs, and how many people are getting kind of jobs that they are getting. So this again reminds me of a conversation I once had with one of my colleagues, who was saying that there is a such a big problem about employment in India, like that, and it's very hand wavy, right? I mean, to say such stuff because you don't have any numbers, right?
Yeah.
And we don't know whether things are good or bad. It's the same thing with the K-shaped recovery. It implicitly sounded right, but to say that 4 years into the pandemic, I don't know, right? I mean, but my point being that we need to get better at one, collection of data, understanding what is going on. Without data, you can't do public policy. And two, a lot of the public policy initiative can't rely on the government sitting in Delhi to do everything for you, right? I mean, this has to be a very bottoms up thing. And I think Pune, one of the few places where I see that kind of conversation, very actively being done. It's probably the feature of the city. It's definitely not happening across India. And I think this is an attitudinal change that is required in a very fundamental way to address some of the issues around health and education, which maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. I mean, I don't have a strong view on it.
So is that one of the reasons why the services part is kicked off much higher, apart from the compliance problem that you have in manufacturing, and the fact that we don't have real skills for manufacturing?
No, the skills can get developed, right? I mean, so
Will they? Will they is the question. How
so
will
so
they?
I think it will, right? I mean, we do, like, we learned. So if you kind of look back at the history of the auto sector in India, right? I mean, it was actually developed over a period of about 35, 40 years. And, we are now building pretty much our own cars. I mean, we don't get those knockdown units from outside. It takes time. These things take time. And you need success stories, right? So to celebrate those success stories, you can create that aspirational cycle where, like, parents say of, people of my age would say, oh, I want my child to, become an engineer and then go on, because it's a way, it's your ticket out of poverty, right? I mean, in a way. And for that to happen, it will require, I mean, it will happen, I think, organically. How successful this entire story will be, I don't know, right? I mean, there's a certain element of false precision in trying to say that we'll absolutely do it, or we'll absolutely suck at it. So I don't know. I think that the answer will be somewhere in the middle. But it is not a choice. We have to do it, right? I mean, I think that's the key issue, that we still are debating whether we should do this or we should do that. Sorry, we have wasted too much time debating these things. We should be doing everything. We are a very large country, and we are a very young country. We should be doing everything. We should make the drones. We should do very well in AI, but we should also do cotton textiles, right? I mean, there's no or. We have to do and.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Raji, same question about unequal access to quality health and education hitting growth.
So I would say, so not everything lends itself to technology-driven change, and I would say health and education are probably two of the sectors where the use cases that can be developed in areas like payments, financial services, even retail and e-commerce. I'm not so sure that you can actually have tech-driven change, for example, in areas like health and education. And having said that, the issues that Rahul raised, obviously, I think are very, very pertinent. Sometimes it's more about fixing things we already know need to be fixed, but for various political economy reasons, those steps are not being taken. But I agree with Rahul. यही समय है, सही समय है. We have to sort of move forward on some of these things. They are well-known issues. Factor market reforms, for example. I mean, talking about textiles and something like the manufacture of production of lightly manufactured goods, so apparel, shoes, etc. So these kind of sectors don't, get the limelight like electronics production or semiconductors or aerospace, etc. But these are labor-intensive manufactures and products where what is holding back the industry is probably a combination of labor laws, capital availability, and so on. And we've known what to do about this for decades. Some of them are also state level issues. States have to move forward on the right track. But I think sometimes we end up debating too much and do not take any action. और वही बातों बातों में सब समय निकल जाता है.
Can I
Yeah,
just
sure,
add
sure, sure.
one anecdote to Rajiv's point? So one of the big asks for Foxconn and Wistron, all the companies who do the iPhone manufacturing, was, and Karnataka and Tamil Nadu both agreed to it, that they want to have 12-hour shifts, right? There's nothing wrong in it. Workers are willing to do it. It did not get done because all the unions, labor unions outside this particular industry are protesting ki how can you do it? They have nothing to do with it, right? I mean, they are not being asked to work for 12 hours, but they are unwilling to allow others to do it as well. And so breaking this kind of vested interest, right, is something that then people have to kind of take this view, and, the media also has to play its part. I think at times there's too much political correctness around things that are absolutely needed. But then, there's a lot of navel gazing that happens that, okay, let's look at all dimensions. We have been, again, doing that for years and years and years, but we need to actually do it. Finally actually has to be done, because if you want to keep scaling up your and provide jobs, the first of we should not be focused on the process side of it. Most of the time we should focus on the outcome, right? Processes matter, but the outcome, if it does not get realized, then it doesn't matter what process you followed and what discussions were had.
No, and yesterday also, in one of the panels, somebody mentioned about environmental and forest laws. They said they exist on paper, but there's an entire informal sector which is operating outside of that. So what is the point of having it on paper and telling yourself, ki, look, we are so good and we have such progressive laws and so on and so forth. What that actually does is it prevents formal businesses from being able to grow, because we have placed such stringent regulations on them. I mean, I have nothing against Scandinavian countries, but we've adopted, in some cases, regulations even more stringent than what some of the Scandinavian countries have. And they are at a HDI level, a Human Development Index level, which is far higher, obviously, compared to India. So what are we prioritizing? And, are we trying to win brownie points from some rating authority sitting in some Western country, trying to tell India that you should do this? And it has gotten to a point where it has become performative, I feel.
So one of the surveys that you were doing with the small companies, somebody had said that there are loads of laws which are compliances which I have to do, but I don't know how to do it. So if you tell me to dispose of all my e-waste, tell me where to do it, how to do it, and then I'll be able to comply with it. Otherwise, I'll just dump it somewhere. And another person actually said, for me, compliance is a drawer full of cash. Okay, I managed to pay off people, and then you're neither here, neither there, and it gets off. So you're right about, if you have the attitude, the right idea behind the implementation part, tell people how to actually comply with the law, then you will get much ahead.
Yeah, and there needs to be a sense of balance here, right? We can't, when we are trying to build up certain industries, we can't get to the end point of having a level of compliance and a level of regulation which may not fit in at our growth stage. So I think we need to be mindful of that. I'm not suggesting that take away the rules or dilute the rules away. But we should be mindful of this, that in some cases, when we go with such stringent labor laws, they become anti-employment.
Yeah.
They are preventing jobs from being created. And somewhere I also feel people in the industry understand this, but then people at large somewhere don't appreciate. And I think there needs to be a collective realization that when these kind of things are being allowed to carry on, we are stopping our own national progress.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why the services sector actually took off much better after the 91s and not the manufacturing so much is the license Raj worked really well. The removal of all the restrictions worked really well for the services sectors compared to the manufacturing. So that has made even that differential. You had something to say about manufacturing and services? No, you don't want to get into that debate now.
We can, but
If you want to, do we have time? It's
think
10.
maybe. No, I mean, so this whole debate between manufacturing and services, what we should be doing both. There is, it's not like, okay, so for services we need computers, right? Or you need smartphones. Who's going to be making those smartphones for us, right? Vijay Gokhale spoke about this widening trade deficit with China. I mean, that is going to continue if you're not making your own smartphones, right? And it's not a question of, how much, like, okay, let's say everyone in India now has a smartphone, right? Or very large proportion of the population do. They will go through an upgrade cycle. Somebody who bought a Lava's phone, they will buy a Samsung or an Oppo or an iPhone eventually. The value of amount of money you are spending on these devices, or on buying a car, buying a scooter, is going to keep rising. We can't depend for everything on the rest of the world, right? So from that perspective, supply chain resiliency is now a reality, right? I mean, this is something even US is doing. They are trying to attract the same companies that we are trying to attract. The only advantage we have is we have a very large population, so and an ability to pay is increasing. Services is something we have done well. We should continue to do well. But global export markets, to put some numbers in context, last year in 2023, the estimated global trade was about $35 trillion, right? Of which services is $7 trillion, $7.5 trillion, and global goods was about $28 trillion. We cannot ignore $28 trillion. Like, we cannot be doing this cherry picking that, okay, I'll only do this because this is something that has worked for me historically. I mean, tomorrow, what if,
No, and the question is, why has it not worked, right?
Yeah.
So let's
That's
address
more
why it
important.
has not worked.
And the thing is, again, we are not going to suddenly become the next China. I don't think we have any intention to become the next China. But it's one where, we should also not become completely dependent on China, right? I mean, so from that standpoint, we should be looking to grow our trade shares. Nothing wrong with it. Maybe we will fail. I mean, that's the only thing that one can say. But we need to try. We cannot ignore a very, very large part of the global economy where we have not been historically competitive.
Do you want to say something?
No. I just find this whole argument being put out by certain quarters so ludicrous. It's just disappointing when it is recycled every few months, and all of us have to, face it again and bear the brunt of that illogical sort of, frankly, garbage. Because like Rahul said, it is not mutually exclusive. And when it comes to job creation, we have to emphasize labor-intensive light manufacturing. So, for example, shoe production. So, sneakers, right? So, we need to have companies coming up in India which make sneakers, even have the kind of foreign manufacturers of these kind of products coming here, setting up factory, creating jobs. And obviously, there's a very solid, very strong strategic imperative when it comes to products like electronics and semiconductors. So on both those fronts, whether it's the light manufacturers, whether it's the more technology intensive products, there is no question to me that we have to pursue this. A country of India's size, it cannot have only services or only manufacturing. I think we tend to forget the scale that we're talking about. People will often say, "Oh, but New Zealand did this, and Singapore has done this." Well, one district in India is bigger than New Zealand in terms of its population. That's the reality. We should remember that when we draw such parallels. So we have enormous job creation needs. We have very urgent requirements in terms of building our own strategic capabilities in certain industries. And without manufacturing, we cannot do that.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had done a study, this was published in the Oxford Handbook of Indian Economics, and sources of growth. And we found that it was actually manufacturing which is a source of growth for India, and services depend. Like, if manufacturing starts flagging, your services growth actually starts reducing. So the link is not service-led growth, it is manufacturing leading to services. Talking of trade-offs and all, I think, those of you who've been following me on Twitter know that I always feel that framing a debate is, environment versus development. Uska wo disparity date ho gaya, band ho gaya. We're over and done with that now because we have a lot of evidence of climate change. Like recently, now we have snowfall deficit across the Himalayas, right? November, December, and even January is fairly bad. This leads to water stress. So when we're talking about like inequalities, and those of us who are working in financial inclusion, now that the broad universal access to banking is kind of covered, everybody's focus is now on the excluded parts, and which on what we call the financial well-being of households, is that are they able to actually withstand a shock? And here the stress that is coming out of extreme events is very local, but it's quite extreme. And then there are even more gender there's a gender impact already built into that. And the World Economic Forum this time at Davos they have a global risk report every year, and the top global risk this time was extreme weather. So I think, as macroeconomists, we tend to look at growth at a very macro level. But the point is that there are very local communities and people who are getting increasingly vulnerable, and will not be able to enter the the pathways that have been created right now of financialization, digitization, and startup. They're just going to get out of it even more. So how do you think we are going to manage this? It can't be an either or, but how do we manage this?
No, so I think, I mean, this is again one of the issues that Dr. Nageshwaran has,
Yeah.
been writing about. And I think the problem of this entire debate, at least in my personal view, is that, there tends to be a lot of binaries that get drawn, that, this and that. The problem with that kind of an argument would be that, even the green transition, right? If we kind of just take climate as an example, requires such a huge amount of energy intensity in terms of replacing of existing power plants, changing, or providing a lot of construction activity, to say put up those sea barriers and stuff like that, that the amount of metals you need, the amount of mining impact it will have, the amount of the mineral footprint of it. And there's a wonderful book, again, Anant had told me about this book called The Material World. I highly recommend reading that book, because it is pretty shocking in terms of the amount of, like, because it cannot be just a debate about, how do it has to be a something in the middle. Now obviously we need to protect those communities, who are at risk, and there has to be mitigation efforts. But to do that, you need to continue to grow the other part of the economy as well, right? So let me take an example in Mumbai, right? I live in that city. Mumbai has had terrible pollution for the last 4 5 weeks. In, I would say, roughly on par with Delhi. And this is basically because of construction dust, which is coming through. For all the, it's like a war zone, right? I mean, anybody who has no clue about Bombay that lands up there will think the city has been, like bomb gira ke gaye hai koi wahan pe. It is kind of that badly. Huh.
And rebuilding is going on.
And rebuilding is going on, but the thing is, it is required, right? You need to build those roads to actually reduce the green footprint, reduce the carbon footprint rather than increase it. But that's a growing pains of transitioning, right? You cannot escape that. In this particular context, I think the one other point I would make is that the financial aspect of it, and this is something that has been called out, I think, a lot by India, particularly in the wake of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, is the fact that even Western countries have kind of dithered on the whole issue when it came to their own citizens having to pay a very high price. It is India's opportunity here is that we have still not built that much amount of power plants. So we are actually pushing the envelope on renewable energy quite dramatically, right? And so this becomes a growth opportunity for us from a very 101 standpoint. We don't have that much stuff that we need to replace, but it is going to be extremely energy intensive to do the green transition itself.
Here I do feel very optimistically about the engineering capabilities in the country. I think we are actually in some ways underestimating the climate tech and energy tech kind of sort of capacities that are building up now. And one more thing we should keep in mind is the R&D productivity of India. So per rupee or per dollar, what it takes to translate something from invention stage to product stage is India would probably rank highest in the world. And that is the reason why we have a very large, what's called the Global Capability Center, GCC Center, the GCC industry, where you have the Fortune Global 1000 companies. I think something like 70 or 80% of them have very, very large R&D centers running in India, where they are employing scientists, engineers, technologists, doing mission critical R&D work. So the likes of Boeing, Visteon, Google, obviously, Google, Meta, all the big names that you can think of, even in the pharma sector, across auto industry, aerospace. So that depth of technical talent actually was never incentivized to solve problems over here. We were simply solving problems for global corporations. But one of the, I think, very positive side effects of the whole entrepreneurial boom in the country has been there is a large base of startups now which is looking at what are the problems here in India. and India is my domestic market. So what can I do over here? And when they look at that set, climate tech ranks pretty highly in that area. And I think there is like a flowering of new ventures in that area, which will provide us many powerful solutions.
Okay. That's really
So,
great because,
yeah.
like you said, instead of keeping it as a binary, you have to have solutions to this. So similar to the e-waste person, the person said, I want to dispose it off, I don't know how to do it. You just
Yeah.
have to tell you how to do it. Similarly for construction, there are rules that actually can minimize the dust, which are done abroad. And whether you want to do it or not depends on who is suffering from that pollution. If you're
Yeah.
sensitive to that, the answer will come out.
Yeah,
There will be
and there's no
solutions.
question that given the state of most Indian cities now, when it comes to pollution, livability, etc., we have to address this, right?
Yeah.
It's a very practical problem.
Yeah, yeah, it hits your health and
So
productivity again directly.
so I think instead of being a technology importer, the fact that we are now inventing and developing our own technology, it just tells me that in the longer run or in the medium term, we will see Indian companies actually offering our solutions which work for us. We will be offering them to other countries.
Okay, that's wonderful because so we have a coffee conversation at Rupali every morning, and that's exactly where we stopped our climate change debate. Is that we have enough confidence in ourselves to have develop the solutions and engineering capabilities to actually address the problems we have. So long as people are sensitized to the fact that there is a problem that needs to be addressed, there will be a solution to it coming through in-house. Q&A from the audience, please.
Hi. Question to the panel. Particularly want to ask about how do you think that in this digital or rather tech-enabled service industry that we are seeing, where there is a disruption almost every single day, how is the higher valuation resulting into a higher value add for those who are actually powering all of this? How is my Uber getting higher valuation becoming a higher value add for the driver who's driving the cabs? That's the question.
Okay. Okay, take multiple questions then, yeah.
Hi. The theme of this public policy festival is trade-offs. What are the trade-offs you are thinking here? Because I think everything is going great as per you at this point in terms of the direction we are going.
Ouch. Are we too optimistic? Somebody at the back right there?
Considering the banking background for both of you, I just wanted to understand how the banking across the globe should address the sustainable development funding, because sustainable developments may not be economically viable for the banking angle. So I just wanted to have your thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, and one last question. There's a girl who raised her hand here at the back.
Hello. Regarding chemical compliance that we see in Europe and US upcoming there, and in India, we do not have such stringent laws, which are actually anti-business. But considering the fact that we are part of global supply chain, how do you think that would affect Indian manufacturers here?
That's interesting. Okay, I will stop here. Yeah. Who wants to take which question?
Nini, so on the question on Uber, no, so whether it's Uber or some other company, obviously the increasing valuation has no impact for the driver. But I would point to one solution which we are developing in India, something called Namayatri. So Namayatri is one of the digital public infrastructure tools that the protocols that India has developed, where essentially the driver gets the lion's share, actually the entire share of the revenue from the customer, instead of getting only 20%. And this is not a theoretical thing anymore. Obviously, it's activated in 4 or 5 cities. I think cumulatively it has distributed a few hundred crores at this point to drivers, delivered millions of rides, and slowly this is scaling up across the country. So the solution for that, actually, where the capture of the value happens by the platform and the driver doesn't get a share or the worker doesn't get a share, we are addressing that in India with DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure.
So it's a publicly funded
Yeah,
Namayatri?
so like the UPI protocol, Namayatri is also developed by It's based on the Beacon protocol. It's open source,
Okay.
and essentially the driver gets the lion's share, or
Okay.
I think the entire share of the revenue. Actually,
That's interesting.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's a digital cooperative. Actually, it's a good way to think about it. Yes.
Trade-offs. 2 minutes. Three questions, very short. Trade-offs.
So on the issue of trade-offs, I think it's about ultimately it's about creating productive jobs, right? And I think there'll be two problems or two challenges that will emerge over the next few years. One is that we will hear more and more about how income levels are not going up, and this is fundamentally a feature of elementary economics. Remember your demand and supply. If you have excess supply of labor, then you will not have a lot of high increase in prices, right? So wage costs are not going to go up. So this is going to be an issue. I think ultimately the trade-off is if we don't use the demographic dividend properly, does that create a social schism, right? And I think, at what point does that advantage become a disadvantage? And, there are countries, not at the scale of India, which could be, you can see it in a positive or negative light, who have been at this particular threshold level of demographics and have failed as well, right? So you have examples of Argentina, Iran, you have Brazil to a certain extent, which was somewhere in the middle. They have failed at utilizing their demographic properly. And so the discontent that gets created by it is really the challenge, and so we need to get this right now.
Yeah, and just on that, I do think we discussed many of the challenges. We talked about factor market reforms not going deeper. We said that health and education you can't solve purely with digital approaches. So we did.
yeah,
I don't think we gave only a
Very rosy picture.
rosy or entirely positive.
Yeah,
There-
we'll give ourselves
obviously,
8
there are a
out
lot
of
of
10.
challenges that are there.
Okay, about the bank's global banking funding sustainable development
So
ventures.
not speaking for my employer, but I think in general there's a huge emphasis on sustainable development financing, and it won't happen if it is not commercial, right? So there is a lot of emphasis on this idea that you need commercial projects for these to get financed. But that I think is up to the real businesses, right? Banks cannot design such viable projects. It has to be done by the companies, right? And that's where the tech advantages and the progress we are making comes into play. But it is getting done. I think the amount of interest in this area, India itself has a very large green bond market now, so it is getting done. I don't think it's a fair assertion that this is still in that takeoff stage. I think we have already taken off on sustainable
great.
financing.
Okay, last question was about the compliance laws here and when you fit into a global supply chain.
No, so I think for larger enterprises, sure, those who are part of global supply chains, obviously well and good. They should follow the best practices internationally. But my sort of issue is with, let's say, some 50 crore chemical company operating in Marathwada or something, and you force that guy with 500 or 600 compliances. That small enterprise essentially is forced with 500 odd compliances, and if they don't sort of do all of them, some of them have criminal penalties. So how many people are actually going to be able to handle that? Just knowing 500 odd compliances is not possible for any group of executives or business owners. That's my issue actually with for MSMEs. I think the bar is simply too high, and that's one of the reasons why we have this kind of dwarfism in the Indian sort of enterprise landscape, where we have too many small firms, and we find that our firms are not able to scale up. So one of the reasons is, I think, there is what one would call regulatory cholesterol. There's simply too much regulatory burden on these MSMEs, and it doesn't make any sense to hold them to European standards when, frankly, they are doing business in India. At the moment, they're not looking to sort of go anywhere outside India. So as long as they obviously not doing something damaging or harming someone or harming the environment in a terrible way, there's no need to hold them to that level of global best practice.
Can I just give the students a homework? Listen to Sanjeev Sanyal on this issue. He has done a lot of work. Sanjeev and his team has been working on this meteorological law. That's what it is called, funnily enough. But please go and check out his lectures on this particular problem. He's done a phenomenal amount of reduction in the the amount of regulatory cholesterol that's being done. but there's a lot more that can be done from here on.
No, absolutely. So thank you very much for a wonderful panel. I think to just sum it all up, I'd say that the government has to be an enabler. Even if you're putting in compliances, understand what compliances they are. Help the enterprises actually work through those compliances, which will be more of a cooperative way. Second part is wherever the trade-offs are concerned, if you have an enabling environment, you would have industry as well as citizens and cooperatives coming through with solutions, so long as everybody is sensitized to the problem, and the solutions are definitely going to emerge. And therefore, I think all three of us are very optimistic about the India. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.